Welcome to Wealth Management Mixtape, a go-anywhere show about life, finance, and investing. Join Jake Heisler and Tim Miller as they talk about what they're reading, writing, and experiencing. Jake Heisler and Tim Miller work for Quaker Wealth Management. All opinions expressed by Jake and Tim or any podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Quaker Wealth Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment or financial planning decisions. Clients of Quaker Wealth Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
All right, so we're really excited to have the CEO and founder of Hivemapper, Ariel Seidman, with us today on the podcast. And just a quick backdrop, actually, for you, Ariel. Tim and I kind of come from a pretty traditional wealth management and investment background. So when we started to discover kind of just how big already blockchain technology kind of has spread its tentacles, we were a little surprised. So we've been kind of keeping up to date weekly on venture capital in that space, where it's going. You know, we read an article about Multicoin and some of their recent investments, and that's why we came across Hivemapper. So we're super excited to talk to you and get to know you a little bit better and the company. And just so I'm going to give my best shot on how Hivemapper works and that sort of thing. And you can correct me where I'm wrong. As we understand it, Hivemapper is a kind of a blockchain-based mapping network that turns DASHCAM footage into maps that are kind of constantly evolving. It rewards those contributors who capture that footage, the 4K footage, and with the native token Honey. And it's rolling out in the second half of this year. And then the editors of the map who process that footage and do quality assurance and annotate imagery, that sort of thing, are also rewarded with Honey tokens. So for us, it was really neat to kind of discover that there's kind of this symbiotic relationship between the mappers and ultimately the folks that are using the API. And the way that we were looking at it was, anyone, any company or government agency that's using mapping software today theoretically could be a user of Hivemapper's kind of mapping system.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. That was a great summary. Very well captured. I think you said it really well. I think over time, what will happen is that there will be multiple layers to the map, right? So if you think of a dash cam just driving down the street, so there's two supported mount positions that the dash cam can be in. One is going to be forward facing. So it's seeing, stop lights and speed signs and all those kinds of information at street level. And then the other camera that you can also mount it in is side facing, where it's actually facing the buildings and the sidewalk. And that's capturing, business information. So, Sal's Pizza Shop, here's the hours of operation, here's the address, here's what the door looks like, all that kind of information. So that's the layer that we're starting with. There's a lot of economic activity that happens at street level, obviously. And then over time, add additional layers, right? So, even potentially doing at some point like 360 cameras, doing the airborne layer, doing traffic layer. So there will be additional layers over time in order to truly build out a global map like what you would see with Google Maps.
Yeah, gotcha.
Ariel, before we get into the mechanics of Hivemapper, I first wanted to ask you, or say congrats on the pre-sales that you've already had. And I wanted to ask, is today the last day for the discount for the dash cams?
Today is the last day for the pre-order for the dash cam. So definitely get in there and pre-order yourself one. And so the way that we do this is there's a little bit of confusion. So I want to try to clear it up a little bit, which is, so come mainnet launch in late summer timeframe, there's about 33 regions. So if you're, let's say in the LA metro area or the Washington, DC area, first of all, those areas are quite large, right? So let's say take DC metro, even if you live in like Baltimore, that's considered part of the DC metro. Okay. So anybody who pre-orders one in any of those 33 or 35 metro areas that's on our website, you'll start getting it and you can start earning tokens, Honey tokens, that is. Then come later this year, we'll start to roll out globally, right? So that anybody who pre-orders, let's say you're somewhere in Brazil or something like that, or Argentina, and you come in and you pre-order, you will probably get, not probably, you will get your DASHCAM before somebody who, let's say, orders in, October or November, right? So you'll effectively be out there mapping and mining before anybody else would.
And to this point in the pre-sale process, what cities have you seen or have done the best to this point?
That's a good question. So I'll talk about countries first. So countries, U.S. has done very well. Number 2 is surprising on that list. Number 2 is South Korea. I think number 3 is either Canada or UK. So it's like 3, 4 is like Canada, UK. And I forgot who the 5th is now. So that's at the country level. In the US, at the metro level, LA's done very well. San Francisco's done very well. New York, DC, Austin, Chicago. The one that's not on that list is Miami. So like people talk about, Miami is like the new crypto center of the world. And then all of a sudden you look at like their actual, purchasing, and it's like, it sucks. So they got work to do. Tim's
got his credit card ready. He's got a countdown clock before the end of the night here.
Nice.
We're outside Philadelphia, by the way, so we're not in one of the preferred cities just yet. But we're excited about it.
But DC is pretty close to you guys. So
yeah, we're not far. That's right. That's true. And before we ask another question about Hivemapper, I follow you on Twitter, and you have beef with Warren Buffett, right? First of all, he's like an OG in our industry, but look, we have beef with him too. So we need to hear your side on that.
So, I was actually talking to my brothers about this. Like, look, the guy's done very well, right? So, like, let's just start with that. Now, I think somebody like Jamie Dimon actually has like a much more, even if you're going to be a critic or a skeptic of blockchain, which is totally fine. I have no issue with that. I think somebody like Jamie Dimon comes at the problem and tackles it with a better approach. He's like, look, from a technology perspective, it's super interesting, right? It's super useful, super relevant. We as JP Morgan are going to use it. And then there's going to be applications on top of crypto, and some of them are going to be very interesting and some of them are going to be less interesting. But like, yes, I believe in that. Now, in terms of cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin versus Ethereum versus blah, 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 some other cryptocurrency, he's like, I don't have an opinion, let that,
right.
We'll see where that goes. So I think that's a better, even if you're a skeptic, and I would put Jamie Dimon into the skeptic category, broadly speaking, of crypto, I think that's a much more nuanced, informed perspective. Whereas, Warren is like, it's all evil. And it's like, no. like there are definitely parts of it that are kind of just not very useful and maybe even scammy, right? But like, you know what? Like that's true in the broader economy as well, right? And so look, I think it would be a mistake for U.S. policy to be highly influenced by somebody who has missed many of the major technology shift over the last 30 years.
Yeah. We talk about that a lot on previous episodes, that there's this adoption curve in any industry or any technology that everybody's out until they're in, and almost everybody's mind changes eventually. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger and those guys have been so set in their ways, and time has been very kind to them in the net worth they've built. But we're just having fun with it because we said the same thing on a previous episode. Were you always kind of entrepreneurial minded growing up, or after you got out of school, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like, so I'm one of 3 brothers, we're fairly like tight in age. And so I think we were all kind of raised, like we've all done entrepreneurial things in the tech industry over the years. And so, yeah, we were all raised with this like sense of, make, sorry, I don't know if I can curse on your show, but like make shit happen, was kind of like the overall ethos growing up. And so, I remember like selling t-shirts with my buddies, this goes back, we were talking about this before, like Chicago Bulls, like they would have their big parades of the year. We would go buy t-shirts for $5 and then sell them for $20. Right. my mom is French. So we would go to France and like we'd go to camp, whatever. And we'd like basically take a duffel bag worth of t-shirts and of Chicago Bulls t-shirts. And we'd mark them up like, like $25 a pop, whatever it is. And these kids would like call their parents back at home and basically be like, hey, can you send more money? I'm getting a good deal on these t-shirts. And so like we understood what they were saying in French. I'm not sure they realized that. And we're like, wait, a good deal? Like we should charge more, So yeah, so it's always like in our bloodstream.
That's pretty cool. I spent some time in England and I did a similar thing where for some reason the kids in college loved Nike gear, but they couldn't have access to it. So they called a buddy back at college over here. I went to Gettysburg College. And had him like ship me out like 100 Nike t-shirts, which I sold for a lot more. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. So.
And by the way, congrats on the fundraise too. That's I always wonder how does that feel? Like when you're the dotted line is signed and it's got to feel good, but I also imagine it comes with some level of extra kind of pressure.
Well, this wasn't my first one, so I think like the first one I did probably react a little bit differently. Yeah. Which is, I think a lot of entrepreneurs make this mistake of they think that they're like whatever the valuation is, and then like whatever their percent ownership is, they like immediately be like, oh, I'm worth X amount, and it's like no, like you're not actually. It's like that's like kind of just total bullshit. And I think that's like just from a mental perspective, if you go down that road and kind of follow that path long enough, that's like a pretty unproductive, unhealthy path to go down, right? It's all paper, right? At that point, right? It's just not great. So. Yeah, I give myself like 24 hours, 36 hours to like enjoy, celebrate, chill out a little bit. And then it's just like, back. I just enjoy the grind of building a company and enjoy, all the ups and downs associated to it. Like, it's like, to me, it's like, I'm addicted to it. Maybe this is better said. Like, I actually enjoy it. Like, I know a lot of people like they tire of it and whatever, but no, I think it's like, it's fun. It's part of the process.
And you're in San Francisco. So why'd you choose San Fran?
So I moved out here like 2007 timeframe. So I worked at Yahoo. So I worked in Yahoo actually when I was in New York, and then I moved out here with Yahoo, and then left Yahoo like 2010. So like I've always kind of my tech industry days have really all been here in the Bay Area.
Gotcha.
So like the core team is definitely in the Bay Area, right? And we definitely had some people during the pandemic, some people moved to Austin, another person moved to like Wyoming, one to LA. Anyways, like we've definitely had some people like move around a little bit, but the core team is still definitely very much here. I think, I don't know, like how much you guys talked about this. Look, a lot of people left the Bay Area, right? There's no doubt about that, right? People moved to Miami, Austin, whatever.
Austin,
it's starting to finally come back in terms of the energy, the passion, all that. And, my hope is that I think it's important. I think it's important for the U.S. economy, for, the Western world, for the Bay Area to thrive. And it still has this like great builder mentality that it was unclear during COVID if like whether or not that would like, sustain and be a thing still, but no, it's coming back, and it's coming back big.
Great. Gotcha. All right. We'll switch back over to Hivemapper here. I watched your TEDx talk. Did you do a TEDx talk a long time ago?
Back in the
2016?
Day, like the drone stuff. Yeah.
Like the first stuff. Yeah. So the original idea, drones? And that was it?
The original idea was like, let's go build a map of the world. Let's use drones. That did not work. The drone industry.
Was there any, sorry to cut you off. Was there was that a response in any way to Amazon saying they were going to start delivering via drone? They announced it like back in 2013 or something.
So my history with maps goes back to actually when I was Yahoo and working on Yahoo Maps, Yahoo Local. And it was very clear like that Google was starting to build their own map. Right. And I was just like, we got to go build. And what I mean build their own map, I was like, they were going out and collecting all the data for it. Right. They had their own airplanes. Obviously everybody knows the Google Street View cars. And so they were just pouring ridiculous amounts of money, and you could see their map actually improving, right? So like we were looking at super granular level detail kind of stuff to like ascertain, the quality of their map versus the quality of our map. it was good. And like, theirs was just getting better. Like there's just no two ways about it. And so I was like, okay, you got to pony up and, put real dollars to work here. At the time, the Yahoo CEO was like just not interested in those kinds of massive, big, digital infrastructure investments for a whole variety of reasons. So I got frustrated and left. And they kicked our ass. I mean, they just just straight out kicked our ass. And that was like very frustrating, both as a competitive person, like a hit to your ego, but also more importantly, like I started to realize, I was like, holy crap, they're going to own all of our data, right? All of our location data is going to be wrapped up in Google. They'll know everything about us, from a business perspective, they'll own massive amounts of market share just because they're investing so much bigger and so much heavier than everybody else. So that's kind of fast forward, to today, that's definitely happened. So I've been on this journey of like, okay, how do you build a global map and how do you do it cost effectively? So my first company, Gigwa, kind of had this. We solved one part of the problem in terms of how do you collect the data at scale. So we had it was kind of mobile mechanical Turk for folks who know what mechanical Turk is, like these people who are like out there in our case, they were out there with their iPhone and the Android device collecting data for like Bloomberg Financial, Procter & Gamble, World Health Organization, and many mapping companies. And so, it was starting like that. It was working right from the supply side. The demand side was a little bit messed up because the business model was not scaling, right? Like every customer was like their own little unique snowflake who wanted something different. Anyways, I left that. And then a year and a half later, I started Hivemapper, which was like, how do you build out this global map? And we started with drones. And drones did not work because the battery technology did not improve very much. And then the other big issue has been, regulation. So we put that to the side and the DASHCAM stuff really started to scale and it scaled beautifully. So we're like, this is the approach.
When did it click that this not only could be, but should be kind of blockchain based?
Yeah. So we started off basically, two things. When we first started, we said, we didn't have enough capital at the time to go build our own DASHCAM, right? But what we saw was there was a lot of friction associated with the DASHCAM and collecting, right? So every 3 days, somebody had to pull the SD card out of the DASHCAM and then manually upload it. And so even with that friction, it was scaling and it was scaling really, really well. And it was, cost effective, even as we were paying people basically in cash per tile, right?
Gotcha.
And so okay, if we build our own DASHCAM such that the experience is truly set it and forget it, then, the expected earnings on the contributor side goes way down, right? Because you're not asking the person to do a lot. It's like you're asking them to, buy a DASHCAM and install it. But then they're already driving, right? If you're an Uber driver, you're a Lyft driver, you're a delivery driver, or you're just driving a lot for work, like you're already on the road, right? Like we're not asking you to take on a behavior that you normally don't do. And so even if the thing is, giving you some honey tokens, right? But it's not earning, I'm just making this up, just to be very, very clear, but you're not earning $5,000 a week or something like that. It's still interesting, right? And I think that was the insight that I had with Hotspot was like, yeah, you buy it and then you put into your house, okay? And then, it's all icing on top, right? Once you kind of made back a little bit of your money. So I discovered Helium 2019, I believe. And then I saw, maybe it was late 2019, if I recall correctly. And you could tell that, they had San Francisco, maybe a couple of hotspots, not a lot, maybe 20, 30, and they had a couple in Austin, Texas. But then I read their white paper and I was like, oh, this makes a ton of sense. And so somebody introduced me to Amir. Amir took a liking to what we're building, was kind of, as I was kind of figuring out how do we take this business model and apply it to Hivemapper and what are the benefits associated with it. He was kind of, in the background, following along and doing that conversation with me, so, which was incredibly helpful. Yeah. And so at that moment, I was like, okay, look, this makes a ton of sense. But that was about a year, maybe about a year and a half to the point where I felt like, okay, this actually makes sense for what we're trying to do. took it to some of our existing investors, and they're like, yeah, this makes sense.
Gotcha.
So in 2019, you find out about helium, and shortly after, I guess, are introduced to Amir in some capacity. At what point were you introduced to the guys at Multicoin?
So we started to get serious about building the Hivemapper onto the blockchain, right? And so then it was a question of, do we build our own blockchain like Helium did, right? So people don't always appreciate that Helium from a technology perspective is impressive because it's not only a layer 2, but it's actually a layer 1 as well, right? So they built the underlying blockchain technology. So there was this question of like, do we do that, right? Which is a lot of work, very challenging. Or do we just build on top of somebody else like an Ethereum or Solana? So we had started to go down that road and started to figure that all out. And so Amir knew Anatole, the CEO and co-founder of Solana. He introduced me to Anatole and Raj, and we showed him what we're building. And it was Anatole who actually connected me with Tushar and Kyle at Multicoin.
Gotcha.
So yeah, there was like an interesting piece because we weren't like going to raise. This was last summer. Yeah, last summer, like July, August timeframe. And so like we were like not prepared to go out and raise, quite frankly. And so Tushar is just like, we find this interesting. Let's have a conversation. And it was like, then it ended up being this like 50-page document where he would ask a question, we would answer it. He would ask another question, we would answer. It just kind of went back and forth. But it was really helpful actually because it helped us understand how he thought about our business. And it probably helped him understand how we thought about, what do we have to do here to get this to, something interesting and very successful.
I was going to ask you, just kind of going off that, how long does that process take to kind of sort out all the details of how the reward system is going to work, the mining of honey tokens, who gets what, the mappers, the annotators, et cetera, how it gets pulled back over time based on saturation, that sort of thing. How long does that take? I mean, is that a process that built kind of on top of somewhat similar to Helium's strategy they have? Is there a similarity there?
There's some similarities, but if you look at like what we're trying to do, I mean, obviously maps and wireless industry, they're both, geographically, it's very important, right? Like you need a certain number in their case of hotspots or towers and, very specific locations. And some locations you need more and more just because of the terrain. So we have different challenges, right? There are some cities that are just harder to map than others because of traffic patterns, because of very, very narrow roads, because of, what type of vehicles are allowed here versus there and all these kinds of issues, right? And then you also have privacy laws and other laws in local jurisdictions that make mapping, challenging. So from the, when we really started to think about this was probably all those different mechanics and everything like that was probably, I'm going to say June or July, not June. So May of last year, right? And we had a network that was working, right? It was all cash. It was like a third-party DASHCAM, not our DASHCAM. So we had data that was already coming in terms of what works and what doesn't work. I think if you're trying to do this like blind, like in other words, these are the mapping mechanics that you should use, right? But not actually looking at the data and like having the data and having real people in the real world doing this, you're going to make a ton of mistakes, right? Yeah. Even the smartest person in the world is going to make a ton of mistakes. So that was really helpful, right? So we weren't basing our perspective or opinion on like just, because we're smart mapping people. It was like we really saw what was happening. So that was and then the other thing was that we also saw what happened to some other systems. Like there was a system that came before us that was trying to do something somewhat similar that ultimately sold to Facebook called Maplery. And I won't go into all the details. Look, Maplery is very successful. Those guys are really smart, but there were some specific things that in retrospect, I think they would probably do differently. So we also had the benefit of that hindsight. So with both of those things, we were able to then spend, the next 6 or 7 months kind of building out all the mechanics that you see in the document on Hivemapper today that really details exactly what you're talking about in terms of coverage, mechanics, freshness mechanics, quality mechanics, and really incentivizing that and being very transparent with, the contributors being like, look, this is not just like a theoretical exercise. Like we're collecting data, and the customers who we're collecting this data for care about certain things. And so we're going to align the things that we're going to incentivize with the things that the customer ultimately cares about here.
Right. Gotcha. We read through the white paper, but let's break it down in a really simplistic way. So Tim orders before midnight tonight his discounted DASHCAM, right? Gets it in the mail, assuming it's in a city that's, a preferred city at this point in time. What are the mechanics actually of, so installing the DASHCAM? I know that's probably fairly simple, but then it's just downloading an app, the Hivemapper app, connecting the two through, I assume, Bluetooth, and then going from there, just driving from there.
Yeah, or then you just drive, so you get, so the way the data flows is from the DASHCAM itself to your app, right? So you do have to have the app in the car, right, with you while you're driving. That 99.9% of the time that happens. I can't recall a day that I don't have my phone on me when I'm driving. The app you don't have to have the app in the foreground, okay? So the app could be running in the background. You could be, if you're an Uber driver, Lyft driver, you have the Uber app in the foreground, and then Hivemapper can just be in the background. That's totally fine, right? Then the imagery gets moved from the DASHCAM to your contributor app on your iPhone or your Android. And then when you get back home or you get into the office and you connect to Wi-Fi, it will automatically move up the imagery that it needs. And so it may determine, look, I don't need this imagery, right? Like somebody else collected it, or, this is duplicative, or like some other reason. And so obviously we don't want to transfer any data back to Hivemapper if that imagery isn't absolutely necessary for the purpose of building the map.
Gotcha. And then you said that the mainnet, am I saying that right? The mainnet drops later this year, right? What, you have a time frame on that? So
there's mainnet beta, which is for those 33 regions. That's late this summer. And then mainnet, what we refer to global, starts later this year.
Gotcha. Understand. Okay. So I guess is the target market then, so if we just want to kind of shift over to the API side, it's really anybody who's using mapping software. But is it Uber and Lyft and FedEx and UPS, or is it more targeted than that?
So logistics and automotive, broadly speaking, is just a huge market, for mapping geospatial products and services in general, right? So all those businesses you just mentioned, basically, if you were to go inside of their kind of, their software engineering teams and their IT budgets and all that kind of stuff, maps and map data and mapping software is a huge part of that business because they run on it, right, effectively. Right. To give a smaller example, there's a delivery logistics company based in Canada, one of the big cities in Canada. I forget exactly. They have like hundreds of trucks, hundreds of delivery vehicles. They were kind enough to kind of show me their mapping technology, logistics, delivery management systems. They have multiple different mapping products in there for address verification, building verification, where's the optimal place to park if you're delivering to this location versus that location, what are the parking fines on this street versus that street, very, 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 very detailed stuff, because if you can shave 20, 30 seconds off of every single delivery, you save, time and gas, time and delivery time, labor costs. So, they're doing hundreds of thousands of deliveries every single week. If you shave 20, 30 seconds off of each one, that's massive. So yeah, that's a huge industry. But there's others, right? I mean, think about real estate, commercial real estate, residential real estate, insurance. They're all making decisions based upon location. Then you have state, local, county, federal governments, huge consumers of map and location data across the board. So yeah, you have, right there, 3 big industries, and there's 20 others, right, that follow it. So My contention, I haven't, I don't have the data to back this up, but I think it's pretty clear that even if you never pick up the Google Maps or the Apple Maps product, you're still probably interacting with Google Maps data 6 to 7 times a day, right?
Right.
And so you just go to a travel site, you go to a commercial real estate site, you go to a residential real estate site, you pick up Uber or Lyft or something like that. You check on the status of an Amazon delivery, right? Like all of those in some form or fashion are using Google Maps behind the scene.
Got it. Yeah. Makes sense. So in the perfect world, how quickly does this get built out? I mean, and then therefore these end users are knocking on your door, getting real-time updating maps at a discounted price.
It's a good question. So I think it's about layers, right? And so if you say, when is the entire cake built out? That's 5, 6, 7 years. Like most people will probably say like 10 or 12 years, but I think we can do it faster. I think we can do it in like 5 to 6 years, the entire stack, right? So, just pick up Google Maps and look at all the different layers in that product. That's a lot that you're talking about. But I think you can still be interesting to customers, even if you don't have every single layer in a map, right? So you start off with one layer. You can see that on our website today, which is basically map image API. And then you add another layer, which is, okay, I'm not going to just give you imagery, but I'm going to tell you about the objects, right? What are you looking for? Are you looking for a new street sign? Are you looking for a new traffic light? Are you looking for a new vehicle that's always parked in this location that's blocking everybody? Are you looking for new construction? Like, what is it that you're looking for? And you can just query the map that way, right? And then over time, you can add geocoder, right? Which is basically like a fancy word for geographic search. So you can add layers on top of layers, and that just takes, as the map gets richer, as it builds more coverage, and as the team grows, then you can build out those APIs. And by the way, like the thing that's kind of interesting and special about Hivemapper is like, we're not going to be the only one building out the API. Like other people can come on top of us and build out the API as well.
Yeah, that was part of what we found interesting in the blockchain kind of, I don't want to say industry, but the blockchain technology, that it's almost like these Legos that you can kind of put together and build on top of each other. And that's, the mapping world obviously has an application there. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Is there any, I guess actually I have a more generalized question for you, which is, you're in the room with these folks, like these smart people, you're one of them that's building new ideas that are blockchain based. Is there anything you say like, man, I wish I thought of that, or that was just like an obvious thing that's going to change, that you think it's going to change our lives? I think this is one of them.
Yeah.
We all use maps, to your point.
Yeah.
Well, you think of?
I've heard people talk about Uber, doing an Uber on the blockchain or some version of that, right? Because today it's, revenue sharing where like the drivers don't actually have any ownership stake in the underlying thing. I think that's interesting. The problem with doing Uber or a version of Uber on the Web3 is that every single ride is its kind of own unique SKU or own unique product, right? So I think that's fairly hard for a decentralized system to get right? Where there's so much variability, things are changing, by the minute. Every single product has a different price. So I think that potentially lends itself a little bit better to something like a centralized service. I'm thinking through that one a little bit more. But the one that I actually think that is interesting that I haven't heard, where I wish I heard more, was like doing something like FedEx, right, or UPS in a much more decentralized kind of way, where the drivers and the delivery persons, right, have a much bigger ownership stake in it. They effectively have their own routes, right? They own part of the company. They can start to build, bring other people on, within their kind of area or territory. And that product doesn't change that much, right? Obviously, prices do change, gas goes up, things change, whatever. But, you're delivering from a central depot to a destination. there's not that much variability there, or at least not as much as on the Uber side.
Gotcha. Yeah, the blockchain is coming for every industry, including our own, which is wealth management. So we're really excited to kind of see those changes evolve over time. We have one final question, which is, what's something you've learned in this process, right? Whether it was GigWalk or it was Hivemapper, that you wished you knew earlier on in life when you were starting these companies, or even before then?
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit cliche to say, but I think it's about like mental resiliency more than anything else. Like, you just get the shit beat out of you all the time, every day. And I think it's like, just keep going, right? Like, what does Churchill say? Something to the effect of like, when you're going through hell, just keep going. And I think that like the entrepreneur journey is a little bit like that. So like all the glamour stuff, like, yeah, some of that happens. I don't want to like, yeah, there are definitely moments where there's parties and all that kind of stuff, and it's fun, it's enjoyable, and you should go enjoy that kind of stuff as well. But the vast, vast majority of the time is you're grinding, right? And you're just pushing, and you're knocking doors down, and you're trying to make shit happen. And so, if you're not up for that mental resilience and and you don't build that mental toughness, and you take everything personally, it's going to be a really bad day. It's going to be a bad year, bad decade for you if you do that.
Right. Gotcha. Well, look, we really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully you enjoyed your time.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you.
Usually we rate a beer at the end of every one of our episodes. I don't know if you're a beer drinker or not.
I like beer.
That's okay. So we should ship one out to you ahead of time.
We should have sent you one.
We should have sent you one. It's called the Pop Chart. It was Wealth Management Mixtape, so we named it the Pop Chart. Anyway, next time. There's always
Awesome.
next time.
I just got into this melon cart. Is it melon cart or something like that? Beer. It's like a mango cart. Sorry, mango cart.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like a refreshing mango tasting beer thing.
Gotcha.
It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun.
Well, we'll have to check it out. We try to be local breweries here to help those folks out and stuff. And anyway, next time we'll send you a beer ahead of time.
We'll love it. Love it, guys. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Take care.